Jen has ordered a decadent seafood tower, king crab legs, lobster tails, and a waterfall of caviar. Pricey? You bet. But Jen worked with Empower on her savings and investment strategy and planned for splurges like these. She got good at money, so she can be a little bad. Ooh, champagne. Empower. Invest well, live a little. Start today at empower.com.
Past performance is not indicative of future returns. Investing involves risk. You may lose money. Advisory services are provided for a fee by Empower Advisory Group, LLC, EAG, a registered investment advisor with the Securities and Exchange Commission. OMG, those shrimps are really jumbo.
We've been focused on Guyana this season, and for good reason. It's on track to become the world's largest oil producer per capita in the next decade. But it's also important to note that what's happening in Guyana is pretty illustrative of what's happening all over the world right now. There is a global oil rush, and it's hitting the Caribbean region and Africa particularly hard. Today, I'm bringing you a conversation with reporter Jeff Goodell at Rolling Stone, who's just written a scorching piece on what's been happening in Namibia, particularly with respect to a company that seems to have claimed on paper that there are billions of barrels of oil on its land, but never actually proven that there's anything there. That never stopped them from drilling, though, right next to a UNESCO World Heritage Site, no less. And those completely unnecessary exploratory wells have caused plenty of environmental damage. Jeff went to Namibia to figure out what the heck has been going on. He's going to talk us through all of it, how it fits in with what we've been seeing in Guyana, and how it all relates to the global oil rush after this quick break.
How does PwC take your company to the leading edge? They bring the sharpest minds in tech to your team, so you can bring the ideas that will transform your business. They're passionate about your industry, so you can walk into any room with every advantage. And they're with you every step of the way, so you can know you're headed in the right direction. PwC builds for what's next, so you can get there now. Get started at pwc.com/us/leading edge.
The Abercrombie Kids Summer Sale is in full swing, with up to 50% off select styles for the season. Summer plans, vacation, and camp days are all covered, with new dresses, shorts, tees, and swim. Abercrombie Kids has the summer staples they need and the looks that they want to wear. Shop in-store, online, or in the app. Offer applies to select styles as indicated. Discount applied at checkout online.
Hey, it's Paris. You know I love sparkly things, right? Like stars. Duh. And thanks to Hilton and AutoCamp, I just slept under them. Picture me, serving looks by the fire outside my luxurious Airstream, making s'mores with the kids, while a national park is our backdrop. The great outdoors meets Hilton hospitality. That's hot. Explore all the new ways to stay at Hilton.com. Hilton for the stay.
My name is Jeff Goodell. I am a writer at Rolling Stone and the author of a number of books about energy and climate change.
We're talking because you just wrote this massive feature about oil exploration in Namibia and a little bit in Botswana, in Africa in general. And I am fascinated by this story. So I guess I wanted to know how you first started looking into this. What first popped onto your radar that made you go, oh, this is something worth looking into?
Well, I got tipped off by a foundation who told me that there was this drilling going on around the Okavango Delta, which is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. And they were interested in life conservation and things. And like you and many journalists, we get pitched stuff all the time. And I was like, yeah, it sounds great. But, I got lots to do. And
right.
And so I kind of didn't think about it. And then I was just sort of Googling around one day and thinking more about it and started to look into it a little bit. And it became really interesting to me very quickly because this company called Recon Africa, which was based in Vancouver, they were a kind of, a small kind of oil and gas exploration company. And there was some really good reporting that had been done by National Geographic that suggested that, maybe this was not all up and up. And maybe there was some other game being played here besides straightforward oil and gas drilling and exploration. And it just piqued my interest. And the more I looked into it, the more complex and fascinating it became. And I finally pitched my editors and said, yes, let's go have a look. And that's what I did.
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't want to spoil the story for people because I want them to go and read it. But to the extent that you can share a little bit about what you found without ruining the story for people. Yeah. Can you walk us through what you found when you got on the ground in Namibia?
Well, I think, the first thing I should say is right before I left, I called this Harvard geologist named Paul Hoffman, who's a very, very, very one of the most sort of famous geologists in the world, as far as geologists are famous, who is most known for kind of this idea of snowball Earth, this idea that at several points in Earth's distant past, it was more or less covered with ice. And it's a very controversial theory, but he was the one who kind of proved it. And he proved it by studying the rocks in Namibia for about 40 years. And he knows the rocks in Namibia the way, most people know their children's faces or something. And I called him, and he basically said, I explained the story to him, and I was interested in drilling. Did he have any advice for me about traveling in Namibia and this and that? And he said, there's no oil there. And I said, well, what do you mean? And he said, whatever they're saying, I know this place, and there's basically no oil there. And I was like, well, then what are they doing? And he said, well, one thing you're going to learn is that a lot of oil and gas companies are better at drilling into their investors' wallets than they are into the rocks in the ground.
Yeah.
And with that, I got on a plane and went to Namibia. And so my time there was about trying to understand what was going on. If there was no oil there, then what were they doing? And if there was oil there, was this guy, Paul Hoffman, this man who understands Namibia better than anyone, was he completely wrong? And was that a remarkable kind of discovery? Recon Africa was claiming there was 120 billion barrels of oil that had been produced in this basin that they had so-called discovered. And as you know, 120 billion is a pretty big number. And so that got all their investors in a tizzy. And
yeah, I mean, that's that would make it, bigger than almost any other oil field on Earth, just to put it in context for people. Like, they're like, hey, we discovered the new Saudi Arabia and no one else knew it existed for this whole time. Yes.
So the first thing I did when I got there is, one of the things that makes this story different than a lot of other stories is where this company, Recon Africa, leased about 9 million acres of land in Botswana and Namibia. And a lot of it is very close to the Okavango Delta, which is this UNESCO World Heritage Site, which is a kind of pristine ecosystem that is, renowned for the number of elephants that live and migrate through there, for its wildlife population of lions and, all the sort of big mammals that people pay a lot of money to go on safari to see. But it's also just this, this kind of miraculous place, this delta where the water runs down out of the highlands of Angola and creates this unique ecosystem that is basically unpolluted and untouched. And then that water disappears into the Kalahari Desert and just sort of vanishes. And it's this amazing place. So the first thing I did was go see this amazing place, which I'd never been to before. And sure enough, it was, astonishing in its diversity of wildlife and in its sort of sublime beauty. And the notion that all this was going to get, screwed up and polluted because of these, wildcat explorers who were drilling upstream of this was, pretty shocking in the sense of like, what the hell are we doing? What is going on here? So it wasn't just the climate aspects of it. It was also just this incredible wonderland of wildlife that was at risk.
Right. And I think that there's a tendency for people to think, oh, well, if they're drilling, but there's not really any oil, then like no harm, no foul, right? But that's very much not true. So can you kind of talk through, what impact does the drilling have, irrespective of whether there is actually this large amount of oil to be tapped there?
Right. I mean, obviously, if there were 120 billion barrels of oil there, it would turn into, it would there would be drilling everywhere, and it would turn into, a kind of environmental nightmare. But you're right. A lot of people think, what's the harm? They were exploring for oil, no big deal. They didn't find it, and so who cares? Well, it matters a lot because an ecosystem like the Okavango Delta is very fragile, and it's all built around this sort of flow of water. And as even drilling these 4 or 5 wells that they have drilled, they're using drilling muds that have God knows what kind of chemicals in them. They're pumping up water from below that has all kinds of chemicals in it that are not mixed in the surface waters. They're cutting roads through these pristine areas, changing wildlife migration patterns, and then there's the whole sort of economy of drillers and kind of get rich quick people who, invade this area, trying to exploit this. And so it's like, even this level of modest exploration in a pristine place like that has profound implications.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit more about this company that is exploring in Namibia? Because I found that really interesting too. Again, I think like a lot of people think, oh, it's just the oil majors doing this stuff, but this is a pretty small, pretty new company that has kind of pulled off something that's sort of shocking, I would say, that they've managed to convince so many people to believe in this projection. Like, it's one thing if, Exxon or Shell says there's 120 billion barrels of oil somewhere, but this is not one of those companies.
No, it's not. It's basically, a handful of Vancouver mining financiers headed by this guy named Craig Steinke, who is a Canadian. And, he and some of the other people, guys, they are all guys, and they're all like, middle-aged white guys, basically, made a little bit of money in fracking in the Permian Basin and in parts of Canada, and have basically spent the last 10 years trying to kind of export fracking around the world, basically. And, fracking is a, North American invention that was sort of, exploited here. And these guys figure out, oh, well, we can do that in other places. So they've trotted around to Mexico and France and Poland and other places trying to frack in basins there. And they've been basically shut down in all of those places, or else the gas fields turned out to be dry, or the gas too difficult to get for whatever reasons. But they've perfected this idea of hyping up the possibility of these discoveries, and then selling, creating a corporation that they then put on the Vancouver Stock Exchange or and some other small exchanges, and hype up investors, retail investors who are on boards like on Reddit and places like that. And they get a lot of money invested in this by hyping up the possibility of, an enormous find, in this case in Namibia and Botswana. So it really is just, it's a handful of people. When I was in Namibia, I went to the company headquarters. It was like, well, okay, so Recon Africa has got this operation that I'm reporting about. It's this high-profile drilling operation. I figured they would have a building, an office, there would be some kind of establishment. And it was basically this like rented little office at the end of this empty hallway where one guy was sitting in a chair with like Office Depot kind of steel furniture, who was in charge of their operations there. And I went in and, said hello and told him who I was. And I was from Rolling Stone. And I'd like to go look at the drill sites. And he was at first really friendly to me. It was really sweet. And like, he's like, oh, great. Welcome to Namibia and all that. And then he said, okay, we'll arrange this. Let me call me back in a couple of hours and we'll set it up. And I left and called him in a couple of hours, and he was immediately very gruff and like, no, we're not, no drill visits. Sorry, we're not cooperating, and hung up the phone on me. He'd obviously checked in with somebody and like, no, we're not letting any reporters anywhere near this. But that's the kind of operation it is. It's not it's not a big company. It's like four guys, who have corralled a bunch of investors, have some money, bought a drilling rig, and are punching holes in Namibia.
It's wild. It's wild that that's like a thing that you can do.
And make a lot of money at it.
Yeah, I make a lot of money at it, even if there's nothing coming out of those wells. Have they, what's kind of the status of this project right now?
Well, they've drilled 3 or 4 exploratory wells. They haven't really, they claim to have found what they call a working petroleum system, but all of the petroleum engineers I've talked to who've looked at their data said it's not a working petroleum system. Their stock price is, under $1 and has been under $1 for a long time. It was up around $7 or $8, I think even $9 for a while a year ago, which was when all of the insiders cashed out. This company was worth at a certain point something like a market cap of like $2 billion, even though, they'd never found any oil, and their office was nothing more than a steel chair in a lonely little building in Rundu, Namibia. I don't know where it's going to go. They looks like they have enough operating cash to go through another quarter or two, but a lot of the main investors have already moved on to other companies, and even the key player, Craig Steinke, who is the sort of man behind this, he's moved on. He's involved in some other companies. So I basically think they're going to fade away. I think that, they're just going to vanish in this sort of petroleum haze. I think that after several years of promising, I think even their, cult-like investors are losing patience with them. And, they've been talking about it, a joint venture, one of the big oil majors coming in and buying them out or buying out a portion of their operation, and which would certainly happen if there was 120 billion barrels of oil.
Sure. Yeah.
They would be in pretty good shape. But the fact that nobody has after all this time is pretty good evidence that even insiders don't believe what they're selling.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you, is there any sense that they have been able to, for some period of time at least, kind of use the discoveries of oil in the southern part of Namibia, where it shares a border with South Africa?
Yeah.
Do you think that they've been kind of using that to, convince people that, oh yeah, there's oil and gas up here too?
Oh, totally. Oh, yeah, they're totally using that. And then also, Shell has there's been a couple of big offshore discoveries in Namibia also.
Right.
Because Namibia, for a long time, had thought they had no oil, or no gas. They were not, Angola to the north,
right,
has lots. And they just thought this was, something that, was not available to them to develop. And then a couple of these big offshore discoveries came on, which do seem real. And then some other discoveries in the southern part of the country. But, Africa, as you know, is at this sort of turning point, right? Of
Right.
like, are they going to develop in this old, like, 19th century, resource curse kind of development path, or are they going to move in a new direction? And I think Namibia is like really at the kind of fulcrum of that decision.
Yeah, I want to talk to you more about that because I feel like Namibia is in this really interesting place. It reminds me a lot of Guyana, which we've been looking at a lot the last year or so, in that Namibia also kind of has this, reputation as like a real leader in conservation and doing so much around wildlife preservation and all of these things. And now they're at the precipice of maybe becoming a big oil and gas producer. And I'm curious about what you found in terms of what people think about it there, how the government is reacting, how people on the ground think about it. I talked to someone just the other day who said, for a long time, folks in global South countries thought about climate change as a global North problem, like a problem that was created by the global North and should be solved by it, which is not necessarily untrue. But unfortunately, everybody is going to be impacted by it too, right? In these countries, more than most. So yeah, I'm just curious what you saw in terms of people kind of grappling with all of those things at once.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it's a really, really important question, and I think probably maybe one of the most sort of important kind of questions in the whole energy climate debate that's happening in the world right now. And it's at the center of the loss and damage conversations that are happening, with the IPCC, and this question of what does the global North owe the global South, and because obviously we, the global North, have created this problem of climate change. We're the ones who have spent 100 years dumping CO2 into the atmosphere, and as you chronicled better than anybody, with oil majors like ExxonMobil knowing what they were doing, and there's no question about who's responsible for this, right?
Right.
And when you travel when I traveled in Namibia and Botswana, energy poverty is very real. It's really important in countries in Namibia and Botswana for more people to get access to energy for all kinds of very obvious reasons. And, there's a legitimate argument to be made that, look, that I even in a meeting with the Namibia's drilling, the head of their sort of drilling operations oversight agency, said to me basically, look, you guys, you meaning America, look what you've done. You drilled everything, and look what's going on now. We just okayed drilling in the Willow Project in Alaska. Look at what we're doing in the Gulf. You have no right to tell us, not to drill. You have no moral standing here.
Right. You stop first,
Right.
It's kind of the vibe. Yeah. Yeah.
And that's really true.
Yep.
It's really true. We do have no moral standing to tell, to come in there and say, shame on you. However, what's very powerful that's happening there, and what I encountered on the ground, was a lot of African activists, African sort of, new energy thinkers who are saying, look, forget what, people in the US want us to do or care. It's for our own good, we need to go on a different path, because the future is not oil and gas. These things are going to turn out to be stranded assets. They're going to screw up our country. They're going to pollute. They're going to do all the things that we can see has happened to the US and to other countries who have gone down the path of fossil fuel development. We're smarter than that. The advantage is to go on this new and different path. And Namibia is a great example, because Namibia's solar resource, for example, is just phenomenal. It's better than California or Nevada. It's really, they have the real gold mine, or the real 120 billion barrels of oil in Namibia is not in the ground. It's in the sun. And the possibilities of that are huge. And they're also doing very innovative things like green hydrogen development, that they have a big project going on that is, I think it's $9 billion or something of investment. that is very progressive and, a kind of step towards this sort of new energy economy also. So they're at this sort of, fulcrum of this change. But one of the things the Recon Africa story shows is the ability of the oil and gas industry world players to, access political officials, to get okays to do things. They know how to pull the levers, and, they know how to, pay off the right people and, get the development going, even in ways that, even if it's not the sort of smartest path or the most democratic path or the one that most people in the country want, they know how to get it done, which is the same story as you saw in Guyana and we see in America.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and then, there's this dual problem, which you pointed to before, of like, it's not just the long-term potential impacts around climate, but also the near-term impacts of, air and water pollution and the potential for oil spills and all that kind of thing too. Did you get a sense of how well or not the Namibian government is positioned to actually like regulate an oil and gas industry?
No, I mean, my sense is that, they are, children in a sandbox in dealing with these, big experienced oil and gas players, even like Recon Africa. I mean, Recon Africa is, in the classic way, kind of trying to exploit this in a way. And they're talking about how, they are, they talk about how their drilling mud and their drilling fluids are 100% organic, right? As if it's like Gwyneth Paltrow developed it or something, It's like, it's hilarious,
Wow. Drilling mud or a mask.
Yeah. Right?
Oh, wow. That's really interesting. Is there a sense like in Guyana, there's very much this idea of like, oh, well, oil and gas is going to make us rich and, solve all of our development financing problems. And in a very big way, it actually gets talked about all the time there that like the oil money is going to pay for climate adaptation, which is such a like really clear example of, what happens when the global north does not step up and do, what it should on climate. It's like, okay, now we've kind of abandoned these countries to rely on oil companies to pay for climate adaptation. And the trade-off is, more drilling and all of that. So anyway, I don't know, is that something that you saw in Namibia as well, where it's like, well, this might be a problem, but it'll bring in money and we need that money to deal with all of these other things?
Yeah, I mean, that's clearly a big part of the sort of pitch that a company like Recon Africa makes. Although in this case, they don't really talk that much, at least that I saw, about climate-related adaptation and money. It's more just like, economic development. It's like, we're going to bring jobs to these poor people. We're going to, provide clean drinking water. We are experienced professionals. We do this right. We're not a fly-by-night organization. We care about Namibia, blah, blah, blah. They're very good at, pitching this as the path for economic prosperity and growth, right? And then you go there and you walk around and you talk to people in the villages and things around there. And yes, they drilled a couple of drinking wells that cost them $2,000 or $3,000. And that has helped a couple of, the villages. And I visited some of these wells and people were happy that they were there. But it's like, buying the local soccer team new shirts or something. I mean, it's like, they know how to build up this kind of goodwill at a very cheap cost. And you ask them about, when I asked people about, employment and jobs, and, they would hire someone to like hold a flag on a dirt road for a day or two and pay them less than $1 or something. And then that would be the end of it. And, clearly all of this drilling stuff is, everything there was Halliburton. I mean, this is all imported stuff, imported engineers. The actual, job possibilities for local people there are very, very small. The oil contracts, most of the money is, going out of the country. The money that's not going into the hands of sort of corrupt officials is going out of the country. It's a very transparent game that anybody like you who has looked at this for a long time knows exactly how it's played, and they're really experts at it, and they're really good at it, and they have that playbook down.
Yeah. What about sort of civil society groups in Namibia? So, like nonprofits and foundations, but also journalism, government watchdog groups, things like that. Are any of those folks kind of starting to look at this stuff more critically?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, Namibia has some really good journalism. The paper, The Namibian, has done some really good coverage of Recon Africa and of the problems with drilling in these fragile areas. So they do have that. They are building. There is a growing, activist community. Fridays for the Future, other organizations like that have a real presence. One of the things that really caught my eye in first beginning to explore this story and deciding to actually go there and write about it was seeing some video of some of the sort of community meetings where local activists were challenging some of Recon's officials who would come in and describe these drilling projects to them, and the local activists really kind of got up in arms about it and really challenged them. And I thought, oh wow, this is really interesting. There's a lot of pushback here.
That's really interesting. Is the government how is the government sort of supportive of that or not, or more on the side of the oil companies or sort of neutral? What's the relationship like there?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's complex, the Namibian mining minister, who a guy named Tom Awendo, who had a kind of community meeting in Rundu, Namibia, which is the sort of largest town near the drilling sites. I was there when he had this community meeting, and I attended it, and he's a very smart guy, very sophisticated, but very clearly if there's oil here, we're going to develop it. This is our rights. We have a right to develop our resources. We want to do this, and we want to do this right. So they're kind of progressive in that sense.
Right.
This is the question is would that actually happen? What would doing it right mean in a place like that? And it's like, can you drill for oil and gas the right way in Yosemite Valley? I mean, no. I mean, you can't, right? If you're going to drill for oil and gas in Yosemite Valley, there's no right or wrong way. It's a disaster any way you look at it, right? And so same kind of thing with the Okavango Delta. It's like, there's no right or wrong way to drill here. This should not be happening, right? I mean, if you value this ecosystem and this planet the way that a lot of people do. So I think that, what's interesting in this story is that, by choosing to drill in this, or very close to this fragile area, they really kind of kicked off a kind of attention and got people like me and activists and others to say, hey, what the hell are you doing? What is going on here? That I think they regret, because I think that they would like this to have just gone through in a much quieter way. And there certainly is other drilling and exploration going on in Namibia that I'm not writing about, and you've probably never heard of, and I've probably never heard of, and that is going on quietly under the radar. But these guys were bold and stupid, and they just arrogant and just thought, oh, what the hell? We're going to drill right next to the Okavango Delta. And lo and behold, people don't like that, including a lot of Namibians who are, were marching in the streets and holding up flags. But we know what's really interesting too is that you really feel, or I really felt when I was there, compared to covering a similar kind of, meetings and activism in the U.S., is fear. There's a real fear there of what the oil companies could do to them. There was a lot of, I talked to a number of activists who said, I'm talking to you, but, if I disappear next week, you need to know, who did this or who was where to look first kind of thing.
Right.
And so you really feel the kind of courage of speaking out there in a way that, I don't really feel when I cover similar kinds of events here in the US or in Western Europe or something.
Yeah. That's interesting. Awesome. Well, I really appreciate you talking to me about it more. It's a great story. We will link to it in the show notes and send everybody over to read it. And definitely we'll be following to see what becomes of Recon Africa.
Yeah, I think they're like a little soap bubble that's going to like pop, really soon here. I don't think they're going to be around for long. But who knows? Who knows?
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thanks, Jeff. I appreciate it. And looking forward to seeing whatever you do next.
Thank you, Amy.
That's it for this time. Next week, we are back in Guyana for the final episode of this season. Don't miss it. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week.